The wind howled through the pine trees like a wild animal searching for prey. Rebecca pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders, but the cold seemed to cut right through the fabric. She had been hiking for what felt like hours, but nothing looked familiar anymore. The trail markers that had guided her earlier were nowhere to be seen. Her phone showed no signal. The GPS that had worked perfectly that morning now displayed nothing but a blank screen with an error message. She tapped it frantically, hoping it would come back to life, but the device remained useless in her trembling hands. "This can't be happening," she whispered to herself, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Rebecca had started her day full of confidence. She was an experienced travel blogger who had hiked dozens of trails across the country. The Cascade Mountains were supposed to be just another adventure, another story to share with her followers. She had planned a simple day hike, nothing too challenging. The weather forecast had called for clear skies and mild temperatures. But weather in the mountains could change faster than anyone expected. The storm had rolled in around noon, turning the bright autumn day into something dark and threatening. What started as a few scattered clouds quickly became a wall of gray that blocked out the sun. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in less than an hour. Now, as afternoon turned toward evening, Rebecca was completely lost. Every tree looked the same. Every rock formation seemed identical to the last one she had passed. She had been walking in circles for who knows how long, and her energy was running dangerously low. Her water bottle was nearly empty. The granola bars in her backpack wouldn't last much longer. But worse than hunger or thirst was the cold that seemed to be seeping into her bones. Her fingers were numb inside her gloves. Her feet felt like blocks of ice in her hiking boots. Rebecca tried to remember everything she had read about survival in the wilderness. Find shelter, stay warm, don't panic. But knowing what to do and actually doing it were two very different things when you were alone and scared in the middle of nowhere. She stumbled over a fallen log and caught herself just before hitting the ground. Her legs felt weak and unsteady. The smart thing would be to stop moving and wait for help. But she knew no one would be looking for her until tomorrow at the earliest. Her friends back home weren't expecting to hear from her for another 2 days. The snow started falling as she climbed over another ridge. Light flakes at first, then heavier and faster until she could barely see 10 feet in front of her. This was bad. Really bad. Snow meant the temperature would drop even more. It meant the trail would become slippery and dangerous. It meant her chances of finding her way back were getting smaller by the minute. Rebecca forced herself to keep moving. Stopping now would mean giving up, and she wasn't ready to do that yet. She had survived difficult situations before. The time she got food poisoning in Thailand and had to navigate a foreign hospital system. The earthquake that hit while she was in Peru. The flash flood that trapped her group in a canyon in Utah. But this felt different. Those other times, there had been other people around. Help was available, even if it took some effort to find it. Here she was completely alone. The silence was almost as frightening as the cold. No cars in the distance, no voices of other hikers. Just the sound of wind through the trees and her own labored breathing. Her foot slipped on a patch of wet leaves and she went down hard on her knee. Pain shot up her leg, sharp and immediate. She sat there for a moment, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. Getting injured now would be a disaster. She couldn't afford to be hurt and lost. Rebecca struggled back to her feet and tested her weight on the injured leg. It hurt, but she could still walk. That was something, at least. She adjusted her backpack and continued forward, trying to ignore the throbbing in her knee. The trees seemed to close in around her as she walked. The path, if it could even be called a path anymore, was barely visible under the growing layer of snow. She was following what might have been an animal trail, or maybe just a random gap between the trees. It was impossible to tell. Her mind started playing tricks on her. She thought she heard voices calling her name, but when she stopped to listen, there was nothing but the wind. She saw lights flickering between the trees, but when she rushed toward them, they turned out to be nothing more than sunlight breaking through the clouds. The cold was making it hard to think clearly. She knew this was a bad sign. Hypothermia didn't just affect your body, it affected your mind too. People made poor decisions when they were too cold. They took unnecessary risks. They gave up when they should have kept fighting. Rebecca tried to focus on putting one foot in front of the other. That was all she needed to do right now. Just keep moving. Don't think about how lost she was or how cold she felt or how much her knee hurt. Just walk. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes that stuck to her jacket and clung to her hair. The world around her was turning white, erasing the landmarks that might have helped her find her way. She was walking through what felt like a blank canvas with no beginning and no end. She stumbled again, this time catching herself against a tree trunk. The bark was rough against her palm, and she could feel the cold seeping through her gloves. Her hands were so numb that she could barely feel her fingers. This was getting serious. She needed to find shelter soon or she might not survive the night. That's when she saw it. Through the swirling snow, barely visible in the growing darkness, was a small building. At first, she thought it might be another hallucination brought on by the cold and exhaustion. But as she got closer, she could make out the solid lines of a log cabin tucked back among the trees. Rebecca felt a surge of hope that was almost painful in its intensity. She stumbled toward the cabin, her injured leg nearly giving out with each step. There was smoke coming from the chimney. Someone was home. She reached the front door and pounded on it with her numb fists. The sound echoed in the stillness, but there was no immediate response. She pounded again, harder this time, desperation giving her strength she didn't know she still had. "Please," she called out, her voice hoarse and barely audible over the wind. "I'm lost, I need help." She heard movement inside the cabin. Heavy footsteps across wooden floors. The sound of locks being turned. The door opened just a crack and she could see a man's face peering out at her. He had dark hair and a beard that hadn't been trimmed in weeks. His eyes were wary, almost hostile. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice rough and unfriendly. "I'm lost," Rebecca repeated, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely speak. "Please. I've been walking for hours. I can't feel my hands." The man looked her up and down, taking in her soaked clothing and the way she was swaying on her feet. For a moment, she thought he might close the door and leave her standing there in the snow, but then something in his expression changed. "How did you find this place?" he asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've been lost since this morning. The storm came in and I couldn't find the trail and my phone doesn't work and I think I might be getting hypothermia." She was rambling now, the words spilling out of her in a rush. The man continued to study her through the narrow opening in the door. She could feel the warmth from inside the cabin, and it made her realize just how cold she really was. "Please," she said again. "I won't cause any trouble. I just need somewhere warm to wait out the storm." The man was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Get inside," he said, but his tone was far from welcoming. "You're letting all the heat out." Rebecca practically fell through the doorway, her legs finally giving out as the warmth hit her. She found herself on her hands and knees on a rough wooden floor, shivering so hard her whole body was shaking. The man closed the door behind her and turned several locks. When he turned back to look at her, his expression was unreadable. "You don't know what you've done to me," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Before Rebecca could ask what he meant, the exhaustion and cold that she had been fighting all day finally overwhelmed her. The warm cabin, the relief of being safe, the knowledge that she wasn't going to freeze to death in the woods, it all hit her at once. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the man moving toward her, his arms reaching out as her vision faded and consciousness slipped away. Rebecca woke up slowly, her mind swimming through layers of confusion and warmth. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was or how she had gotten there. The last clear memory was of stumbling through the snow, lost and freezing. Everything after that was fuzzy, like trying to remember a dream. She was lying on a couch near a fireplace, wrapped in several thick blankets that smelled like pine and wood smoke. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls around her. Her wet clothes had been replaced with dry ones, a flannel shirt that was way too big for her, and thick wool socks that went up to her knees. The realization hit her suddenly. Someone had undressed her and put her in different clothes while she was unconscious. Her face flushed with embarrassment and something that might have been fear. Where was she? Who had helped her? "You're awake," the voice came from across the room, and Rebecca turned her head to see the bearded man from the door sitting in a wooden chair near the window. He was watching her with the same wary expression she remembered from the night before. Or had it been the night before? She had no idea how long she had been unconscious. "How long was I out?" she asked, her voice coming out as a croak. 2 days, he said simply. 2 days. Rebecca tried to sit up, but her head spun and she had to lie back down. Her body felt weak and shaky, like she was recovering from a serious illness. "Your core temperature was dangerously low when you got here," the man continued. "You had hypothermia, moderate stage, maybe heading toward severe. Another hour or two outside and you probably wouldn't have made it." Rebecca stared at him, trying to process what he was telling her. She had been that close to dying. The thought was terrifying and somehow unreal at the same time. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You saved my life." The man didn't respond to that. He just continued watching her with those dark, guarded eyes. Rebecca noticed that he had changed clothes since she first saw him. Instead of the heavy winter gear, he was wearing jeans and a simple gray sweater. His hair was cleaner too, though the beard was still untrimmed. "I'm Rebecca," she said, hoping to break the uncomfortable silence. "I know," he replied. "You had ID in your backpack." Right. Of course he would have gone through her things. That made sense if he was trying to help her. But something about the way he said it made her feel exposed, like he knew more about her than just her name. "What's your name?" she asked. He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "David." It was the first real piece of information he had given her about himself. Rebecca filed it away, along with everything else she was learning about this strange man who lived alone in the mountains. The cabin was small but well organized. From where she was lying, she could see a kitchen area with a wood-burning stove, and shelves lined with canned goods. There was a table with 2 chairs, though it looked like only one was ever used. Everything was clean and tidy, but there was something almost obsessive about the way things were arranged. Every can was lined up perfectly. Every tool hung in its exact place. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. 3 years, David said, then seemed to realize he had given away more than he intended. His jaw tightened, and he looked away from her toward the window. Rebecca followed his gaze and saw that it was snowing again. Big fat flakes drifted past the glass, adding to what looked like several inches that had already accumulated. The world outside looked completely white and silent. "The storm's not over," she observed. "No. Weather Service says it'll keep going for another day or two. Mountain weather changes fast and stays longer than you expect." He seemed more comfortable talking about practical things like weather and survival. Personal topics made him shut down. Rebecca made a mental note of that. As a travel blogger, she had gotten good at reading people and figuring out how to get them to open up. But David was different from the locals she usually interviewed. He seemed actively hostile to the idea of conversation. Her stomach growled loudly, and she realized she was incredibly hungry. When was the last time she had eaten? Before she got lost, which meant it had been at least 3 days. "There's soup?" David said, as if he had hurt her stomach. "You need to eat small amounts at first. Your body's been through trauma." He got up and went to the kitchen area, moving with the efficient motions of someone who had done this routine countless times. Rebecca watched him pour soup from a pot on the stove into a bowl, then bring it over to her along with a spoon. The soup was simple, chicken broth with vegetables and noodles, but it tasted like the best meal she had ever had. The warmth spread through her body as she ate, and she could feel her strength slowly starting to return. "You know a lot about hypothermia," she said between spoonfuls. "I used to be a park ranger," David replied, then immediately looked like he regretted sharing that information. A park ranger. That explained the medical knowledge and the survival skills. But it raised other questions too. Why was he living alone in a cabin instead of working for the Park Service? What had happened to make him leave that life behind? Rebecca wanted to ask, but something about David's posture warned her off. He was like a wild animal that might bolt if she moved too quickly or asked too many questions. Instead, she focused on her soup and tried to think of safer topics. "This cabin is really nice," she said. "Did you build it yourself?" "It was here when I found it," David said. "Old hunting cabin. I fixed it up." Looking around more carefully, Rebecca could see the improvements he had made. New chinking between the logs, a more efficient heating system, solar panels she could glimpse through the window. Someone had put a lot of work into making this place livable year-round. "It must be peaceful up here," she said. Something flickered across David's face, an expression she couldn't quite read. "That's the point," he said quietly. The way he said it made Rebecca think that peace wasn't the only thing he was looking for. He was hiding from something. Or someone. The isolation wasn't just a lifestyle choice, it was a necessity. She finished her soup and set the bowl aside. Already she was feeling more like herself. The weakness was still there, but the fuzzy confusion in her head was clearing up. "I should probably try to get back," she said. "My friends will be worried." David looked at her like she had suggested jumping off a cliff. "You can't leave. The storm's getting worse and you're still recovering. You try to walk out of here now and you'll end up just as lost as before. Probably dead this time." He was right, and Rebecca knew it. But the thought of staying here with this strange, hostile man made her nervous. She didn't know anything about him except that he used to be a park ranger and had been living alone for 3 years. He could be dangerous, he could be unstable, he could be anyone. On the other hand, he had saved her life. He had taken care of her while she was unconscious. If he wanted to hurt her, he had already had plenty of opportunities. "How long do you think the storm will last?" she asked. 3 days, maybe 4? Depends on how the front moves through. 3 or 4 days trapped in a cabin with a man who clearly didn't want her there. Rebecca tried to imagine what that would be like. The awkward silences, the tension, the feeling of being an unwelcome intruder in his carefully controlled world. But what choice did she have? David was right about the danger of trying to leave too soon. She had already proven that she couldn't navigate these mountains on her own, even in good weather. In a blizzard, while still weak from hypothermia, it would be suicide. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll stay until the storm passes, but I don't want to be a burden. I can help with cooking or cleaning or whatever you need." David's expression darkened. "I don't need help. I've been taking care of myself just fine." There was something defensive in his voice, almost angry. Like the idea of needing help from anyone was personally offensive to him. Rebecca filed that away too. Whatever had driven David to this isolated life, it had made him fiercely independent. Maybe too independent. "I know you don't need help," she said carefully. "But I need something to do. I'm not good at sitting still." David studied her for a moment, then gave a short nod. "Fine, but don't touch my stuff. Don't move things around. Everything has its place." The warning was clear. Rebecca was a guest here, but barely tolerated. She was disrupting his routine, his peace, his carefully ordered world. And from the way he kept glancing toward the door like he was fighting the urge to throw her back out into the snow, she got the feeling that her presence was affecting him more than he wanted to admit. "You don't know what you've done to me," he had said when she first arrived. At the time, she had been too cold and exhausted to think about what that meant. But now, watching the way he avoided looking at her directly, the way his hands clenched and unclenched when she spoke, she was beginning to understand. David wasn't just living alone by choice. He was hiding from human connection entirely. And now she was here, disrupting the isolation he had worked so hard to maintain. For reasons she didn't understand yet, that was dangerous for him. The question was, dangerous how? By the 3rd day, Rebecca was feeling almost back to normal. Her strength had returned, and the frightening confusion that came with hypothermia was completely gone. She was also going stir-crazy. David's cabin was small, maybe 600 square feet, total. There was the main room with the fireplace and kitchen, a tiny bedroom that David had given to her while he slept on the couch, and a bathroom that was barely big enough to turn around in. When the storm was raging outside, there was literally nowhere to go except these few small spaces. David had a routine that he followed with almost military precision. He woke up at exactly 6 every morning, made coffee, checked the weather, radio, and ate the same breakfast of oatmeal and dried fruit. Then he would spend the day doing maintenance tasks around the cabin, checking the solar panels, organizing his supplies, repairing small problems before they became big ones. He didn't talk unless Rebecca asked him a direct question, and even then his answers were usually 1 or 2 words. He moved around the cabin like she wasn't there, completing his tasks with quiet efficiency. The only time he really acknowledged her presence was when he brought her meals or checked to make sure she was feeling okay. It was like living with a polite ghost. Rebecca tried to respect his need for space, but by the 3rd day, the silence was driving her crazy. She was used to being around people, used to conversation and laughter and the normal messiness of human interaction. This sterile quiet felt unnatural. "The storm's starting to clear," she said that morning, looking out the window at patches of blue sky between the clouds. David glanced up from the radio he was fixing. "Still snowing on the higher peaks. Roads won't be passable for at least another day. But it's getting better, right?" He nodded once and went back to his radio. Rebecca watched him work. His hands were steady and sure as he handled the small electronic components. He clearly knew what he was doing. Everything about David suggested competence and self-reliance. So why was he hiding up here instead of using those skills in the outside world? "Can I help with that?" she asked. No. The answer was immediate and final. Rebecca bit back her frustration. She understood that David valued his independence, but this was getting ridiculous. She wasn't trying to take over his life. She just wanted to feel useful. "I'm good with electronics," she said. "I fix my own camera equipment all the time." David looked up at her with an expression that might have been surprise. "You're a photographer?" It was the first time he had asked her a question about herself. Rebecca felt a small spark of hope that maybe they could actually have a conversation. "Travel blogger," she said. "I write about places and take pictures. That's actually why I was hiking up here. I was working on a piece about hidden gems in the Cascades." Something shifted in David's expression. Not exactly interest, but maybe less hostility than usual. "What kind of places?" he asked. "Off the beaten path stuff. Places that tourists don't usually find, small towns, local restaurants, hiking trails that aren't in the guidebooks. I try to show people the real character of a place, not just the postcard version." David was quiet for a moment, considering this. "And people read that?" "About 50,000 followers on my blog. More on social media. People like discovering new places, but they want someone else to do the hard work of finding them first." 50,000 people, David repeated like he was trying to wrap his head around that number. "It's not huge by internet standards, but it's enough to make a living, usually." The qualification slipped out before Rebecca could stop it. She hadn't meant to admit that her career was struggling, but something about David's quiet presence made her want to be honest. "Usually?" he asked. Rebecca sighed. "The travel industry has been tough lately. Competition is crazy. Everyone with a phone thinks they're a travel blogger now. I've been having trouble finding my niche, standing out from the crowd." She was oversharing, but it felt good to talk to another human being about something real, even if that human was a grumpy hermit who clearly didn't want to hear about her problems. "Is that why you were hiking alone?" David asked. "Looking for something different?" "Partly, and partly because—" She hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. "I needed to get away from everything for a while, clear my head, figure out what I actually want to do with my life." David's hands had stopped moving on the radio. He was actually listening to her, really listening. It was the most engaged he had been since she arrived. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Rebecca was surprised by the question, and surprised by how much she wanted to answer it. "Bad breakup," she said. 3-year relationship that ended when I caught him cheating. Found out he'd been doing it for months. Made me question everything. My judgment, my instincts, whether I knew anything about anything." David nodded slowly like he understood that feeling. Then my dad had a heart attack, Rebecca continued. He's okay now, but it was scary. Made me realize how much time I spend traveling, how little time I spend with the people who actually matter. I started wondering if I was just running away from real life instead of living it. She hadn't planned to tell him all of that. The words just came pouring out, 3 months of bottled-up feelings and confusion. It felt good to say it out loud, even to a virtual stranger. "So you came up here to think," David said. "Yeah. Lot of good that did me. I got lost before I even found a good thinking spot." To her surprise, David almost smiled at that. It was just a tiny curve at the corner of his mouth, but it transformed his whole face. For a moment, he looked younger, less guarded. "Thinking's overrated anyway," he said. "Says the man living alone in the mountains." The words came out before Rebecca could stop them. She immediately regretted them, afraid she had pushed too hard and he would shut down again. But David didn't seem offended. "Fair point," he said. They worked in comfortable silence for a while after that. David continued with his radio repair while Rebecca organized the books on his shelf, which were in complete disarray. She noticed he had an eclectic collection: survival manuals mixed with classic literature, field guides to local wildlife next to philosophy books. It was the first real clue she had about who David was beyond the gruff exterior. "You read a lot," she observed. "Not much else to do up here. What's your favorite?" David considered the question seriously. "Depends on the mood. Sometimes I want something practical, something that teaches me a skill. Other times I want to get completely lost in a story. Escape? Something like that." Rebecca pulled a worn copy of Into the Wild from the shelf. She had read it years ago, the story of a young man who gave up everything to live alone in the Alaskan wilderness, and died there. "This one's pretty beaten up," she said. David's face closed off immediately. "Put it back." There was something sharp in his voice, a warning. Rebecca quickly returned the book to its place on the shelf. She had hit a nerve, but she didn't understand why. The comfortable mood from earlier was gone. David finished his radio, repair in silence, then announced he was going outside to check on something. He pulled on his heavy coat and boots and left Rebecca alone in the cabin. Through the window, she watched him trudge through the snow toward a small shed she hadn't noticed before. His shoulders were tense, his movements sharp with agitation. Whatever memory that book had triggered, it wasn't a good one. Rebecca felt bad about pushing him. Just when they had started to connect, she had said the wrong thing and reminded him why he didn't like having people around. She was disrupting his peace, bringing up topics he didn't want to think about. But she was also curious. David wasn't just some random hermit who had decided to live off the grid. There was a story here, a reason why a former park ranger was hiding in the mountains with a well-read copy of a book about a man who died trying to live alone in the wilderness. When David came back inside an hour later, his mood had shifted again. He wasn't exactly friendly, but the sharp edge was gone. He made lunch for both of them without being asked, and even offered her a cup of his carefully rationed coffee. "Sorry about earlier," Rebecca said as they ate. "I didn't mean to pry." David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I read that book right before I came up here. Probably not the best choice." It was an opening, an admission that the book meant something to him. Rebecca wanted to ask more, but she could see he was already regretting saying that much. "We all have books that hit us the wrong way at the wrong time," she said instead. "Yeah." David looked out the window at the clearing sky. "Storm should be over by tomorrow morning. You'll be able to leave then?" There was something in his voice that Rebecca couldn't quite identify. Relief? Sadness? Maybe both. The thought of leaving was starting to feel complicated for her too. She had come to the mountains looking for clarity, and instead she had found David, a man who was clearly running from something but had still saved her life and taken care of her when she needed it most. She was beginning to realize that David's isolation wasn't just about wanting peace and quiet. He was protecting himself from something. And maybe, without meaning to, she was threatening that protection just by being there. The question was, what was he so afraid of? The rescue helicopter appeared just after dawn on the fourth day, its rotors cutting through the crisp mountain air like an alarm clock Rebecca didn't want to hear. She'd been awake for hours, lying in David's narrow bed and listening to the silence that meant the storm was finally over. She heard David moving around in the main room, probably making his morning coffee and checking the weather radio like he did every day. But today was different. Today was the day she would leave, and somehow that thought made her chest feel tight with an emotion she couldn't name. The sound of the helicopter grew louder, and Rebecca heard David's footsteps moving quickly across the wooden floor. She got up and pulled on her clothes, her own clothes which David had washed and dried for her after that first night. They felt strange now, like costumes from a different life. When she came out of the bedroom, David was standing at the window, with a pair of binoculars. His face was tense, almost angry. "Search and rescue," he said without looking at her. "Must have finally gotten clearance to fly now that the weather's broken." Rebecca joined him at the window. She could see the helicopter circling in the distance, following what was probably the search pattern they used to look for lost hikers. In a few minutes, they would spot the cabin and David's solar panels, and they would land in the clearing, nearby. "I should go out and signal them," she said. "Yeah." David handed her the binoculars but still didn't look at her directly. "You should." But neither of them moved toward the door. They stood there watching the helicopter circle, both knowing that everything was about to change but neither wanting to be the first to make it happen. "David," Rebecca started to say, but he cut her off. "You need to go," he said, his voice sharp. "This is what you wanted. To get back to your life." There was something desperate in his tone, like he was trying to convince himself as much as her. Rebecca studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw and the way his hands clenched at his sides. "Is it what you want?" she asked quietly. That made him look at her finally, and she was shocked by what she saw in his eyes. Fear. Raw, overwhelming fear that he was trying to hide behind anger and detachment. "What I want doesn't matter," he said. "Of course it matters." "No, it doesn't." His voice was getting louder, more agitated. "You don't understand, you can't understand, you need to go back to your life and forget this place exists. Forget I exist." The helicopter was getting closer. Rebecca could hear voices. Now people calling her name through megaphones. They had found her. In a few minutes, this would all be over. She would be rescued just like she had wanted when she first stumbled through that door 4 days ago. So why did it feel like she was about to lose something instead of gaining it? "David, talk to me," she said. "What's really going on here? Why are you so afraid of—" "I'm not afraid!" The words exploded out of him with such force that Rebecca took a step back. "I'm not afraid. I'm... His voice broke on the last word, and suddenly all the anger drained out of his face. He looked broken, lost, like a man who had been holding himself together through sheer willpower and was finally falling apart. "I killed them," he whispered. The words hung in the air between them, so quiet that Rebecca almost thought she had imagined them. But the look on David's face told her she had heard correctly. "What?" she breathed. David turned away from her, staring out at the approaching helicopter. 6 people, a family with 3 kids. They trusted me to keep them safe, and I got them killed. Rebecca felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. This was what he had been running from. This was why he lived alone in the mountains, why he flinched away from human contact, why her presence had affected him so deeply. "David, I'm sure that's not—" "It was an avalanche," he continued, his voice flat and emotionless now. "I was leading a winter rescue training exercise. The conditions were marginal, but I thought we could handle it. I was wrong. The helicopter was circling directly overhead now. Rebecca could see figures moving around inside it, preparing to land. But she couldn't tear her attention away from David, who was finally telling her the truth he had been carrying alone for 3 years. "The family had gotten lost during a skiing trip," he said. "We found them in a valley that should have been safe. I made the call to go in and get them instead of waiting for better conditions. I was the experienced one. I was supposed to know better." "What happened?" Rebecca asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. "The slope above us gave way. Tons of snow moving faster than you can imagine. I tried to get everyone to safety, but there wasn't time. The parents and 2 of the kids were buried. The youngest girl and I were the only ones who made it out. David's hands were shaking now. Rebecca could see the pain radiating from him, 3 years of guilt and self-blame that he had been carrying alone. The investigation cleared me, he continued. Said I followed proper procedures, that the avalanche was unpredictable, but they were wrong. I knew the conditions were dangerous. I should have waited, I should have called for backup, I should have done 100 things differently. David, the girl still has nightmares, he said, cutting her off. Claire, she was 8 years old when it happened. She's 11 now and she still has nightmares about being buried in the snow. I know because her grandmother sends me updates. Tells me how she's doing in school, whether she's sleeping better, if she's making friends. I think she's trying to be kind. But every letter is a reminder of what I took from that little girl. The helicopter was landing now, its rotors whipping, snow and pine needles through the air. Rebecca could hear voices shouting, people calling her name, but she couldn't move. She was frozen by the weight of David's confession, by the pain in his voice and the way his whole body seemed to be collapsing in on itself. So you see, David said, his voice barely audible over the noise of the helicopter. I can't be around people. I can't be responsible for anyone else's safety. I can't trust my judgment. I thought I could live with that. I thought I could handle the isolation. He turned to look at her then, and Rebecca saw tears in his eyes. But then you showed up, he said, and for 4 days I forgot. I forgot what I did. I forgot why I came here. I started to feel like maybe I could be normal again, like maybe I deserved to have someone to talk to. The truth hit Rebecca like a physical blow. This was what he meant when he said she didn't know what she had done to him. She hadn't just disrupted his isolation. She had given him hope. And hope for someone carrying the kind of guilt David carried was dangerous. That's why you have to go, David said. Because if you stay, I'll start to believe that I deserve this, that I deserve companionship and conversation and someone who looks at me like I'm not a monster. And I can't let myself believe that. There were people at the door now, pounding and shouting. The rescue team had found them. In a few seconds, they would break down the door if she didn't answer. Rebecca looked at David, this broken man who had saved her life and taken care of her, and was now pushing her away because he thought he didn't deserve human kindness. Her heart was breaking for him, but she also understood that this wasn't something she could fix with a few encouraging words. The damage David carried went deeper than loneliness. It was carved into his soul, a wound that had been festering for 3 years without proper treatment. He needed help, real help, but he had to want it first. Rebecca! The voices outside were getting more urgent. Rebecca, are you in there? She moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back to David. He was standing perfectly still by the window, watching her with an expression that was part relief and part devastation. You saved my life, she said. That doesn't make up for the ones I lost. No, but it matters. It means you're not the monster you think you are. David shook his head. You don't understand. I understand that 6 people died in an accident, Rebecca said firmly. An accident that you've been blaming yourself for when it wasn't your fault. I understand that you've been punishing yourself for 3 years, and that punishment isn't bringing them back or helping that little girl or making anything better. The pounding on the door was getting louder. Someone was shouting about breaking it down if she didn't respond. I have to go, Rebecca said. But David, this isn't over. This conversation, whatever this is between us, it's not over. Yes, it is, David said quietly. It has to be. Rebecca wanted to argue, wanted to stay and make him understand that isolation wasn't the answer to his guilt. But the rescue team was about to break down the door, and she knew that having strangers storm into his sanctuary would only make things worse for David. She unlocked the door and opened it to find 3 members of the search and rescue team, their faces filled with relief and concern. Behind them, she could see the helicopter waiting in the clearing, its rotors still spinning. Ma'am, are you injured? One of them asked. We've been looking for you for days. I'm fine, Rebecca said, glancing back at David one more time. He had moved away from the window and was standing in the shadows, barely visible to the rescue team. This man helped me, she told them. He saved my life. One of the rescuers looked past her into the cabin. "Sir, we'd like to thank you for your assistance. Can we get your name for our report?" 3 weeks after the rescue, Rebecca sat in her apartment in Seattle, staring at a blank computer screen. She had been trying to write about her experience in the mountains for days, but every time she started, the words felt wrong. How could she explain what had happened up there without betraying David's trust? How could she tell the story of her rescue without revealing the pain of the man who had saved her? Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her editor at the Travel magazine that had commissioned the piece about hidden gems in the Cascades. "Rebecca, how's the article coming?" Janet asked. "We're hoping to run it in next month's issue." "It's complicated," Rebecca said. "I'm having trouble finding the right angle." "What do you mean? You got lost in a blizzard and were rescued by a mountain man. Sounds like perfect adventure travel content to me." Rebecca winced. That was exactly the problem. The story that would sell magazines, the dramatic rescue, the mysterious hermit, the triumph over nature, wasn't the real story at all. The real story was about a man slowly dying from guilt and isolation, and that wasn't the kind of feel-good adventure content her readers expected. "I need more time," she said. "Rebecca, you've been back for 3 weeks. How much more time do you need?" "I don't know. Maybe this isn't the right story for your magazine." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Janet had been Rebecca's editor for 2 years, and she wasn't used to Rebecca being difficult about assignments. "Okay," Janet said finally. "Take another week, but we need something by Friday or we'll have to kill the piece." After hanging up, Rebecca walked to her window and looked out at the city below. Seattle was bustling with its usual energy. People hurrying to work, traffic flowing through the streets, the constant hum of urban life. It was the exact opposite of the silence she had found in David's cabin, and somehow that made her miss it even more. She had been back to her normal routine for 3 weeks, but nothing felt normal anymore. The problems that had seemed so overwhelming before her trip, the struggling career, the failed relationship, the uncertainty about her future, now felt trivial compared to what David was dealing with. How could she worry about her blog's declining readership when he was living with the weight of 6 deaths on his conscience? Rebecca had tried to research the avalanche David had told her about. It hadn't been hard to find. 6 die in Cascade. Avalanche during rescue operation had been front-page news 3.5 years ago. The articles confirmed everything David had told her. A family of 5 had gotten lost during a backcountry skiing trip. The rescue operation had been led by park ranger David Chen. The avalanche had killed both parents and 2 of the 3 children. The sole survivor was 8-year-old Claire Martinez. The investigation had indeed cleared David of any wrongdoing. The avalanche had been caused by unstable snow conditions that were difficult to predict. The rescue team had followed proper safety protocols. It was, according to every official report, a tragic accident. But Rebecca had seen the guilt in David's eyes. She knew that no amount of official exoneration could erase the feeling that he should have done something different, should have made better choices, should have saved them all. She had also tried to find information about what had happened to David after the accident. He had resigned from the Park Service 6 months later and disappeared. There were no social media profiles, no address on file, no trace of him anywhere in the digital world. He had erased himself as completely as possible, leaving only the ghost of his former life behind. The little girl, Claire, had been harder to research. Rebecca had found a few mentions of her in follow-up articles about avalanche survivors, but most of the information was protected by privacy laws. What she did find painted a picture of a child struggling with severe trauma, nightmares, anxiety, difficulty in school, the kind of wounds that might never fully heal. Rebecca understood now why David felt responsible for more than just the deaths. He had survived when others didn't, and he had to live with the knowledge that his decisions had shaped the outcome of that day. That kind of survivor's guilt could eat a person alive if they let it. But she also understood something that David couldn't see yet, that destroying his own life wouldn't bring the dead back or heal Claire's trauma. If anything, it was just creating more casualties from the same accident. Rebecca's laptop chimed with a new email. For a moment, her heart jumped. thinking it might be from David. But he didn't have her email address, and even if he did, she doubted he would use it. The message was from her mother, asking when she was coming home for a visit. Home. Rebecca hadn't been back to her parents' house since before her father's heart attack. She had been too busy with work, too caught up in her own problems to make time for family. But David's story had reminded her how precious and fragile life could be, how quickly the people you loved could be taken away from you. She closed her laptop and made a decision. The article could wait. There were more important things to do. 2 days later, Rebecca was sitting in her childhood bedroom, listening to her father tell stories about his recovery from the heart attack. He was doing well, better than the doctors had expected, but the experience had changed him. He talked about life differently now, with more appreciation for simple moments and less concern for the things that used to stress him out. "You know what I learned in that hospital?" he said as they sat on the back porch after dinner. "I learned that the stuff you think is important usually isn't. Family is important. Health is important. Being kind to people is important. Everything else is just noise." Rebecca thought about David alone in his cabin, cutting himself off from everything that might actually help him heal. "Dad, what would you do if you made a mistake that hurt people?" she asked. "A really bad mistake that you couldn't take back?" Her father was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I guess I'd try to learn from it," he said, finally. "Try to make sure it didn't happen again. Try to help other people avoid the same mistake if I could. But what if you felt like you didn't deserve to be happy anymore? Like you should punish yourself for what you did? That's not how healing works, honey. Punishment doesn't fix anything, it just creates more pain." He looked at her with concern. "This isn't about you, is it?" Rebecca shook her head. "Someone I met. Someone who's carrying a lot of guilt about something that wasn't really his fault." "Guilt's a tricky thing," her father said. "Sometimes we hold on to it because it feels like the only way to honor the people we've lost. But real honor comes from living well, from using what we've learned to help others. Destroying yourself doesn't bring anybody back." That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what her father had said about David's guilt and Claire's trauma, and the way pain could ripple outward from a single moment in ways that no one could predict. She thought about the rescue protocols that had failed to predict the avalanche, about the warning systems that might have prevented the family from getting lost in the first place, about the support systems that could help children like Claire recover from trauma more effectively. By morning, she had an idea. Rebecca spent the next week researching avalanche safety and rescue procedures. She interviewed experts, read scientific papers, and learned about new technologies that were being developed to predict and prevent avalanche accidents. She discovered that there were ongoing debates about safety protocols, about when to proceed with rescues and when to wait for better conditions. She also researched childhood trauma and PTSD, learning about new therapies and support programs that were helping young survivors recover from devastating experiences. And slowly, a different kind of article began to take shape. Not the adventure story her editor wanted, but something more meaningful. A piece about how accidents happen, how survivors cope, and how communities can work together to prevent future tragedies. She called Janet and pitched the new angle. "It's not what we discussed," Janet said, "but it sounds important. How are you going to get sources for something like this?" "I know someone who was involved in an avalanche rescue," Rebecca said carefully. "Someone who understands the challenges from the inside. Will he talk to you?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to ask." The drive back to the mountains took 4 hours. Rebecca had rented a Jeep this time, something that could handle the rough roads that led to David's area. She had also brought proper winter gear, emergency supplies, and a GPS device that actually worked. She wasn't going to get lost again. Finding the cabin was easier the second time. She remembered the landmarks, the way the trees opened up around the small clearing where David had built his solar panels. As she parked the Jeep and walked toward the front door, she felt the same nervous anticipation she had felt on her first day back at work after being sick as a child. David answered the door on the second knock. He looked exactly the same. The untrimmed beard, the wary eyes, the defensive posture. But something in his expression shifted when he saw her. A brief flash of something that might have been relief before the walls went back up. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I know," Rebecca replied. "Can I come in anyway?" For a moment, she thought he was going to close the door in her face. Then he stepped back and let her into the cabin that had saved her life.